Welcome to Metals and Advanced Manufacturing, the podcast where innovation meets industry. I'm Jennifer Betts, an entrepreneur in the metals industry. With 2 decades of experience from leading roles at Fortune 500 companies to building my own businesses, I bring you conversations with the brightest minds shaping the future of metals, technology, and sustainability. From breakthrough materials to decarbonization strategies and cutting-edge manufacturing, we uncover how industry leaders are building a more efficient, responsible supply chain. Let's get started. Welcome to Metals and Advanced Manufacturing. We have an incredible guest who has actually crossed over, one of the very select few guests who has crossed over from Bets on the Future over to the Metals and Advanced Manufacturing world. It's because she has an incredible background in the metals industry and is on the forefront of a particular area of the industry, the green steel movement. We have Rijuta Dey. She is a senior steel reporter at FastMarkets, and her team has launched green steel prices in the US this year after a successful rollout in Europe and Asia. The industry has not yet settled on a definition of what is green steel, and FastMarkets hopes to be a part of that solution. Also, green steel won't stay confined to a single flat-rolled product like green rebar, green plate, etc. They're on the horizon for the industry. Green steel is more of a movement than a material. And so I want to welcome Rijuta Dey for hopping on to Metals and the Advanced Manufacturing podcast, because we are going to be talking about everything that contributes to technological advancements in metals, covering everything from AI to raw materials to manufacturing and to decarbonization, which leads me into green steel. So Rijuta, thank you so much for hopping on. It's pretty great to see you again, especially since I actually just saw you, spoiler alert, for those that are listening, a little hint to when we're recording this, a couple weeks ago in Pittsburgh, Steel Capital, USA.
Hi, Jennifer. Very happy to be here and to be talking about all the exciting things that are happening in the decarbonization efforts for the steel industry.
Thank you so much for hopping back on here. For those who may not be in the metals world, maybe they're more on the manufacturing side, or maybe they're just curious about what's happening in this world, why should we be talking about steel, decarbonization, anything along those lines?
I was at Climate Week NYC last week, and there were people from all over the world and across different industries. And somebody actually stopped me in the elevator and said, "How can you decarbonize steel?" When I told him that I'm here to cover green steel and decarbonization in the steel industry. And it was a very complex question. And I did not have enough time in the 10 seconds that we were in the elevator together to give a convincing answer to the very skeptical man who asked me that question. Steel is a carbon product, right? And it is one of the heavy industries which is responsible for high carbon emissions in the world. I am genuinely shocked and surprised by how fast the uptake of this movement has been in the US. Because even 3-4 years ago, this kind of attention, this kind of thought, and this kind of money was not involved in the decarbonization process. It is not something that companies are doing just to tick a box. Because as reporters, we are generally quite skeptical about companies per se. And it is something that since I began reporting on this industry, I have seen companies take various routes and make various efforts to reduce their carbon emissions impact. That said, there is no consensus on what is green. There is definitely like understanding of what is lower carbon is whatever is the baseline, going lower than that. FastMarkets as a price reporting agency, we began publishing green steel premiums in Europe and Asia. We launched green steel premiums in the US this year. It's just different in the US. because the rest of the world is heavily weighted towards blast furnace production, and blast furnace production is increasing in the world as the demand for steel increases. The US is heavily weighted towards electric arc furnace production, more than 70% of production, as people in the industry know. But we do have, two remaining integrated producers who are also taking to lower their carbon emissions across different plants and different products. So we want to be a part of that conversation because Fast Markets and my team, led by our editor, Daniel Hilliard, and by a fellow senior reporter, Alicia Alcaf, they are doing a tremendous job of talking to stakeholders across the chain in trying to determine what is that green steel premium. Because we know that big consumers want to pay more, but at the distributor level, I've spoken to some people as recently as after attending Climate Week NYC, where I was telling them about what I had learned and what kind of conversations we were having with stakeholders, and they were like, some of them were like, we don't care if it's like $50 more expensive. I don't think my customers will want to take it, but at least the customers are having that kind of conversation right now where they are inquiring about it. The distributors tell me that the push for a green steel premium is very much product related. So for those OEMs, original equipment manufacturers who supply to the electrical vehicle industry or those kind of industries, be it renewable energy, those specific end markets, they will demand a lower carbon emissions product. The kind of skepticism that I've been seeing from the buyer side, it's still there, it's heavily there, but the price is a factor. Therefore, we are trying to find that premium. We're trying to get that one answer, which has been quite complicated because of the different modes of production in our country, we are not able to come to one consensus, and we hope to be part of the solution there.
And for those that are listening, I do want to make a little note on this podcast. We are going to get a little technical, but we are also going to clarify for those that are listening the acronyms, the behind the scenes of how we manufacture, the global perspective, so that you can follow along. Because to your point, it is about education for the consumers, that they understand that there are options for them so that they can relay that to their end consumer, that they do have the ability to choose. And that, in my opinion, is really going to help solidify the green steel premium. Because when you take a look at other industries, I think about REI, for instance. I'm going on a personal trip that requires a lot of REI products, and a lot of their products have recycled content in them, and they're more expensive typically, and their consumers tend to pay more for that. I remember there was a quote, I believe, at the World Steel Dynamics conference, I believe earlier this year, from a CEO that talked about the correlation between organics and higher prices.
I think so, yeah. The one in June, right? Yeah.
Right. Yes. Where if consumers are aware that there's an option for a lower carbon footprint, especially for younger generations that might be more inclined to be more earth-centric or more environmentally conscious, I should say. They might be more inclined to pay for that particular product along those lines. So I do want to take a step back, and on the blast furnace side versus EAF, if you're not a steelmaker by trade, the blast furnace is essentially a way to make steel from scratch. It involves essentially mining iron ore from the ground and taking a relatively long process to get it from the ground all the way into finished steel. And then there's the EAF, the electric arc furnace, that essentially takes a large furnace remelts the steel and then turns it into a new product. And so that's essentially the two different ways that you have steel that's being manufactured around the world. And the United States has the majority of its steel industry set up from a recycled EAF standpoint. And we can go into why that is in a little bit. And the balance of the world from a global perspective is actually from an integrated blast furnace standpoint. And there are reasons for that as well. But that's kind of just a little behind the scenes of why there's a little bit of a discrepancy between EAFs domestically and integrateds around the world.
The US is an advanced economy. There is a lot of scrap that is generated here, which is not so in the rest of the world, right? So that's the reason why we're able to feed the mills with the scrap they require. And if you have gone to any scrap conference, it has always been a panel discussion that is there, will there be no? That's been going on for years. Two modes of the production, but I see what the integrated people are saying, that you cannot leave us out of the conversation just because we don't produce steel the way you do, which is at the outset cleaner than ours. At the outset, it's cleaner. But we are still steel makers, and if we want to truly make progress towards getting towards net zero, or reducing our carbon impact significantly, you have to take both. But the EF producers, they're like, why? We are already so much better, and we are like putting more money into our processes to become even cleaner. So why should we? That's one of the reasons why we are not able to come to a consensus about what is green, how green, my green is better than your green, that kind of debate. Yes, but much of it, I think, also comes from government incentive, government funding, federal money, the Buy Clean initiative, so many of the federal bills that say, hey, if you're going to get money from the government, make sure the steel is better than what was coming before. That also that propels the movement forward, and the Biden administration has done a lot in that direction. And one of the stories that we have recently covered is what will happen uh, after the elections, because there are two candidates and they're going to take some different steps. We know what President Trump's stance on climate change has been, and we can see what the Biden administration has done in that regard. Both the administrations are quite aligned on the tariffs portion of it, though. They want to protect the steel industry and maintain its place as the country with the highest steel prices in the world. Both the candidates will be the same in that sense. But in terms of climate change policies, yeah, we need to see what will happen. And we have a pretty good idea what the two different candidates will do if one of them comes to power over the other. But for now, a lot of buyers are also motivated by that, because the government is saying that uh, we will fund your project, or we'll give part of the funding if you buy better steel. Also, the Department of Energy, if you remember, the news came out last week, or the news cycle is so intense. Was last week that Cleveland Cliffs said that their Middletown part of the money has come down for their decarbonization project there. The United States government is also doing their part, and maybe they will do more, as they should be doing more, because climate change is a very real threat. I do not think anybody believes we are acting fast enough. So these are very urgent and very real conversations and steps that are being taken right now. And I'm glad, even as a business reporter, I'm glad to be reporting on this. It is quite important.
And you're reporting on a very large, impactful industry to that global climate change aspect. The numbers tend to vary depending on which metrics you take a look at, but it's anywhere from 8 to 9%, sometimes 10%, depending on which, again, source you're looking at. In terms of
11% as well, right? Like,
yeah,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes up to 11%, depending on if we're like really in demand with steel products. In terms of steel being that percentage of global carbon emissions, like just a full 10th percentage of the global carbon emissions annually. And not to knock plastics, okay? They've got some issues as well. It's been very interesting when I go to sustainability conferences or I see posts online or read articles on the sustainability movement, and we're talking about industries that have obviously 1 or 2% issues, or I see a lot of VC money or private equity money that go towards important causes. But when you take a grand scale macro perspective, the steel industry has a pretty impactful, large scale take on the global carbon emissions. And yet, not many from the public are probably super aware of that. And I think that plays into your comment about the adaptation not scaling quick enough from the consumer, not getting that green steel premium latching on from the consumers quick enough, because then that would also play into more investments from the steel mills, probably more investments, maybe backing from the government to help in, or I should say governments. It's not just us in the United States. Okay. We are the fourth largest steel producing country in the world, but there are other countries out there as well that produce steel. So there are a lot of initiatives that could be taken in this area that we're getting some cool technology. There are some investments starting to come into this place. You are starting to see some billionaires like Bill Gates starting to shift their focus and realize that this is a major factor. But again, you're not really seeing the masses being aware of this quite yet. And I think that would be a very pivotal moment for this industry once that happens.
Yeah, that's the thing. The news about, oh, this big company is going to buy 40% lower embodied carbon products is lost on the press releases that business reporters pick up. How many people are reading it? People should be reading it. It should be covered more in general media because FastMarkets it's a price reporting agency. So we are talking very specifically to the people in the metals industry in our particular sectors. And I can understand why that man in Climate Week NYC was so skeptical when I told him that I'm here to cover green steel. And he's like, "Can you?" I was like, "Actually, yeah." Yes, that's something which is not part of a larger conversation. People do focus on fossil fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, and yes, the world is not the United States, but United States is the most powerful country in the world, and many people want to sell to the US, right? And there's also talks that if you want to sell to us, you have to meet a threshold. We're not going to buy dirty steel. Though we don't have people circumventing that. When the US sets a standard, it is a standard for other countries to follow. That said, European countries, especially Nordic countries, are quite ahead in this path of decarbonization. They are very invested in that. Last week, I interviewed the CFO of a stainless steel company based in Finland. He was talking about how he's able to sell his green stainless steel products more easily to customers in Europe than customers in the US because of price sensitivity component. So that is something real. When I'm talking to producers, they do say that a lot of customers say we do want to buy better, but I don't know how many of them are necessarily ready to pay a higher price. And just for clarity, when FastMarkets is saying we want to price green steel, our methodology is up on the website, and 7 tons of carbon dioxide for per metric ton of steel produced, and that does not include carbon offsets.
Yes.
One of the methods that some steel producers take, which we are not including in our green steel specification.
Which I do want to talk about that briefly. The carbon offsets. Can you explain just real quickly what a carbon offset is for those who may not be aware of what a carbon offset is?
Generally, not talking about the steel industry, generally a company can purchase carbon offsets from companies that have created the system where you can give some money and say, hey, I might be polluting over here, but I have paid the money over there. So therefore, I am leveling it out.
You're basically paying to encourage green practices, more or less, in another area.
Balancing the books.
Yes.
That's my personal take on it. I do not want to say that this is my company's take on it, but that's my take on it. When I read about carbon offsets in the world in general, billionaires who take private jets and then they buy carbon offsets. You have emitted that much carbon. And you are paying money to feel less guilty about it or posture about it. So, as opposed to actually investing in technology that takes years to build, takes a lot of money and manpower and all that to give, that is different. Uh, Therefore, that's one of the reasons we did not include carbon offsets in our methodology in the US. But it's not possible everywhere. It's not possible everywhere. Also, it's not really comparing apples to apples when we say that we have a green steel premium in Europe, we have a green steel premium in Asia because of the differences in methods of production in these three distinct regions. So the US price is new. It was launched this year. We are really trying very hard to come to a place where we can provide a simple one number, which is harder than you think it is because of all the reasons I have mentioned. Steel producers in the US themselves, they're not in agreement with who is green, why, who, how green, all that.
Yes. And it's kind of interesting because in one of your articles that I read recently, you laid out the difference between the top four steel producers in the United States and the ranges that they have in terms of what their carbon emissions per impact is per ton. And I'm a little biased. I'm an ex Nucor employee, so I actually was a little surprised, to be honest, to see that they actually did not have the absolute lowest on that list. Now they are still pretty low. I think they were second lowest on that front. But Steel Dynamics,
And have the lowest in the country. After all the consolidation we've had yes, in the industry, we are left with big four, right? And I know the story you're talking about. Alicia, my brilliant colleague, wrote this story. This is a way for the government to assess who is where. This was a story we wrote regarding Biden administration's Buy Clean initiative and the Buy Clean California Act. And the gist of the story was that buyers are being resistant to paying a premium. And this is where a lot of acronyms come up. The Buy Clean initiative, it uses EPDs, which is Environmental Product Declarations, to determine compliance with GWP limits. GWP stands for Global Warming Potential Limits, set by the State's Department of General Services. And this is specific to California.
the industry is at least taking a look at it. To go back to your earlier statement about how the industry has really shifted in the last 3 to 4 years. I've been in the industry a couple decades, and if you had talked about green steel even 5 or 10 years ago, like, you would have just been laughed at or probably eye rolled or we're not talking about this, to it really feels like all of a sudden there's been this huge shift where there has been a really serious take on it. Investments have been made. You referenced the Middletown Works. I mean, that's going to be billion plus investment in Middletown, Ohio for Cleveland Cliffs. That is going to be huge for that upgraded facility if they so choose to do it, because I think they recently just said maybe pause on that potentially.
But then they said, no, we'll do it.
Maybe we're gonna come back and forth on that one, because I mean it is a huge investment for them to do that. But even the fact that they even considered it and that they're going through with it and they're taking a look at it is huge.
I think Cliff's CEO, Lorenzo Gonsalves, he gave an interview to Politico where he said that he's finding that his buyers are resistant to a green steel premium, which is why that news came out that maybe they will pause it because they were not able to. I found that interesting because I know from my own reporting and the reporting that my team does, there is resistance. And the resistance is because of the price premium. It is.
Which is somewhat odd when you think about, and I'm going to kind of pick on Cleveland Cliffs here, what products they produce and where it goes into. For instance, Cleveland Cliffs produces material that goes into the EV industry in particular, right?
The EV market is not that big. That's the thing. It's going to grow bigger, but it's not that big. But yeah, it is something that like gets a lot of news share. But the
Yes.
market not growing at the rate that people had thought it would. It is still the general automotive industry that the Cliffs is supplying to. If I remember his interview correctly, he said that his auto customers are pushing back on like paying a premium.
Steel prices over the past 3-4 years have really shot up. So, I mean, if I was an auto manufacturer, I'd be probably not happy about steel prices either over the past 3 to 4 years either.
Yeah, it's been pretty sad. The prices have come down and have remained down. So that is something we are not going to be seeing $100 per hundredweight steel price again, unless there's another massive black swan event like the pandemic. It had gone up to 98.25 in 2021, and now we are somewhere at like $36. So it's down one third. And that's where generally steel prices were before all this, like $40, $50. It had never gone up to 98.25. That was just an unnatural thing that happened. But steel prices have softened across the board this year because of softening demand is not that good. Producers are not able to push through the kind of price increases that they have previously in the last few years because they're not sticking, because the buyers are not ready to pay higher than what they think they should be paying.
Yeah. I mean, the price of cars, it didn't fall when steel prices dropped. Auto manufacturer, hint, hint. It's hard to justify paying more for a vehicle when wages and things like that haven't necessarily kept up with the rise of those cost of large purchases. So it's understandable to see that pushback from consumers. So until you start seeing those wages increase, yeah, it's a little hard for consumers to justify the additional costs on that front. Doesn't mean that the consumers wouldn't want to see the additional green steel coming into their products. It just maybe they're not willing to pay just yet for that.
Unless it becomes something like carbon tax by the government or something. Unless I'm just thinking out loud now, if the government is like, you know what, if you will buy this kind of steel, I'll give you some tax breaks or something like that. That can be a motivating factor, I
Oh,
feel. Just on the price point, yeah.
well, look at the EVs and the hybrids. The government gives tax incentives to the first X number of cars that are sold, like the people that buy them for each new iteration, or maybe it's for the car company. It's something along those lines. Why can't some of that be tied to the manufacturer purchasing greener products that make up the raw materials for those greener actual products, right? Like it does seem a little bit like an oxymoron if you are making, quote, air quotes, greener products. The government is giving huge subsidies for these, quote, greener products, and yet you're using dirtier materials to build these greener products. Seems like the ROI on that, the break-even point from like the carbon perspective seems a little questionable when you have a steel industry domestically that has 70+% producing it from a very greener,
Better than the world.
better than the rest of the world, isn't?
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was something interesting that I reported on last week, again from Climate Week NYC. Somebody from Mahindra Group, which is this humongous Indian conglomerate, she was there at one of the panels and she was saying, this is an Indian manufacturer, right? And they are buying a lot of steel for their car manufacturing. They make tractors, all kinds of vehicles. And she said, if I can get my suppliers to go from 2.2 tons of carbon produced for a ton of steel, just two, that is a win for us. So she did not use the word green steel. She said green steel is not yet possible for us, but lower carbon emission steel, yes, it's possible. So I can see why some US buyers are like, why do you want us to pay more? We are already cleaner, we are already better. Look at some, like many people do say, look at China, look at India. So, which are, different producing countries, but yes, they are also adding to the carbon emissions of the world. So, if a big company like Mahindra says, we are forcing our suppliers, domestic steel suppliers, to reduce their carbon impact by this much, that will make a difference. Three-step will make a difference.
Lead by example, right? Instead of just, oh, well, what about them? No, lead by example, right? We have some of the best technology available to us in the steelmaking industry here. And we've actually pulled some of the best technology from Europe and around the world and have started utilizing it or plan to utilize it in some of the areas domestically. We do have the money to do that and the government support for it. Lead by example.
There was David Burritt, US Steel CEO at Climate Week NYC, where he made a very specific point that if Nippon Steel is successful in acquiring UST, they would put a lot of money into decarbonizing their legacy assets. And he made a very specific point about that. It was during the panel in which Responsible Steel, Nippon, Big River Steel, their certificate. Point was Nippon Steel's R&D budget is multiple times bigger than the domestic steel makers of the US. And if we can import that technology and have Nippon's money coming and making our steel better and greener, why is there resistance to it? That is also something that was brought up.
100%, which, by the way, I'm going back to your colleague's article. US Steel, which you referenced the CEO's comments right there, has one of, not the highest on the range, but one of the higher GWPs on here.
Yes.
Because they do have those legacy facilities. And when I say legacy facilities, it's because they are traditionally a integrated blast furnace based. Spoiler alert, if you go into their history, they were started by Andrew Carnegie and some other names that you would recognize from your history books because they have been around for so long. Hence name United States Steel Corporation. But because of that, they do have some assets on their books that are in desperate need for some major capital intensive upgrades that currently they really honestly don't have the capital to do.
Yes,
And
they said that. We don't have the money to do it ourselves. We don't have that kind of money.
they don't. And Nippon is based in Japan. And Japan, I believe, is the third largest steel producing country in the world. It's up there. I think we tend to be right up there with them, but they have technology and the R&D to take what is a rusting, unintended, and really invest in it to take it to the next level. It would be huge. Think about the jobs, the technology, the people that are there.
Digitalization also helps in these other lateral ways, right? Like if you are infusing money into an economy, it creates jobs. There are these other benefits of putting money in this process. And just today, US Steel came out with this press release saying if the sale goes through and Mon Valley gets the money that Nippon has promised it'll get, then it'll create like almost $1 billion increment in the total investment in that area of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So just today that press release came in. And I had spoken to somebody a couple of weeks ago when I was in Pittsburgh. And he said he's talking to a lot of labor unions, which is not just the USW, but other labor unions. They are looking forward to the money coming in. It'll create jobs. It's just not good for the health of our only planet, but also it will create jobs, this new money infusion. And also Cleveland Cliffs, if people don't know, it went from a raw material supplier to becoming the big natural producer because they bought up a bunch of plants from AK Steel, ArcelorMittal. Those plants are old. So therefore, that the money that the company is getting for modernizing its plants, Cleveland Cliffs themselves, they have been doing hydrogen injections, amping up DRI, all that. It's a multi-pronged approach. The US industry overall is doing a lot of different things to move forward in the path of decarbonization.
If the US Steel and Nippon Steel goes through, it would be an incredible case study in terms of turning a company around from a decarbonization standpoint, from a green steel premium standpoint, that could be used to showcase in other parts of the world. Because to your contact's point in India, for instance, India is pretty much blast furnaces.
On, yeah.
Yeah. And they've got some aging assets there as well as some newer ones. But it would be an opportunity to take a look at what worked, what didn't work at US Steel when Nippon invested, and be able to use that, learn from that. And it's a win for everyone from a global perspective because the industry, 8, 9, 10, sometimes 11% global carbon emissions could be reduced from this giant learning opportunity from a technology standpoint to take these assets that have been around for decades that need to be updated.
If you want to upgrade an existing dinosaur, which still runs very well, but you need money. You need money, which, see, I've been covering the US Steel thing ever since since it happened last summer, the news came out. Everybody agrees, most people, I cannot say everybody, most people agree that it makes sense e- economically. It makes sense on paper. But it has run into so many impediments otherwise. It has become uh, a pawn of politics
Yes.
in an election year. We are in an election year. So that is the reason, that is one of the main reasons why, that the deal completion is facing so many hurdles.
Yeah.
But yes, David Burett did make that point very categorically that if Nippon succeeds in buying us, we'll have money to decarbonize, more money than we have right now.
We're almost over, which, by the way, when this episode comes out, maybe we'll know who won, who didn't win. Before we go, I do want to get to one last, just because it came out this week on the consumer side of things, the Amazon, the Johnson article that talked about their commitment to buying 2 million tons of, how should I say, I'm going to air quote, green steel.
This is something. This is something quite exciting.
Yeah.
It's a platform. It's called the Sustainable Steel Buyers Platform, and it was pushed by this clean energy think tank during Climate Week NYC, uh, Rocky Mountain Institute (RMI). They are saying that they could see a collective order of 2 million short tons of green steel from major companies. And a lot of big companies are associated with this. It's really exciting for us, to be honest. The companies include Microsoft, there's a solar hardware producer, Nextracker, there's a real estate company, Trammell Crow Company. So it's them together, which they say that they will buy the near net zero emission steel via RMI's platform. This is new. I'm going to be following. I'm going to be following this story and seeing how this pans out. I'm excited to see this because they're saying, "Hey, actually, you want green steel? Come to us." And apparently they have sent out, they're in touch with the domestic steel producers. So that process is already working. And I'm excited to see actually where this goes, because this is a new kind of announcement. Like, these kind of announcements don't come very often. This is quite new. And the fact that they launched it in Climate Week NYC was quite impactful in that sense. Timely, impactful, all that.
It also showcases that there is demand out there for this type of product. I think it shows that there will be, and has been, but there will be a greater demand for the green steel premium, that consumers will be paying for it. You're essentially seeing on a public platform, if you will, companies saying, I want this. And I want you to also,
Definitely they'll buy it, but when will they buy it? How much will they buy?
yes, what that like 2028, I think they specified in there.
I think it's cool. My black heart is not being like that. Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction. I just want to say, Rijuta Dey, thank you so much for hopping on this, the Metals and Advanced Manufacturing podcast. It's been a pleasure. We definitely geeked out a little bit on the steel, the green steel, the global industry from that perspective. Before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we say goodbye until next time?
Thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun to like geek out with you, talk all these acronyms and what they mean. We are going in the right direction as an industry. And I'm not a steel producer, I'm not a steel buyer. I just write about the industry. But we are in that position. My company is in that position where we can lend to the conversation. We want to be a tool that the industry can use in terms of determining what is green steel and how much of a premium there should be. People going to start paying it? Are they already paying it? All that. So we as a team are quite excited to find out where that will lead us, because I know my reporter colleagues in Europe and Asia, they're already like reporting on it. They already are recording that premium. So I want to see how and when that happens in the United States.
The best way to get a hold of you is LinkedIn, Rijuta Dey. Find her on LinkedIn. She's from FastMarkets. You can contact her there. We'll put the information down in the podcast information notes on this episode. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And hopefully, by the time this episode comes out, we have some more wonderful news from these articles that things have been progressing a little bit more on the green steel front. So again, thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank you, Jennifer.